Keanu Reeves just wanted to take a leisurely stroll to the supermarket in Los Angeles. However, a routine purchase of water suddenly turned into an exciting chase for a con man and thief, who, as it turned out, was just a link in a large criminal network. And what happened next in this amazing story, read below. Don't forget to subscribe and like so I know you like such stories. The supermarket seemed like a normal place to buy groceries, but for Keanu Reeves, even the most simple shopping trip rarely went without surprises. This time, he hoped that everything would go without incident. Pulling his hood up, he entered the store and headed straight for the refrigerator with water, hoping not to attract attention. But as it turned out, even a simple purchase could not go quietly. "Hey, are you Keanu Reeves?" An excited voice was heard from a boy holding his mother's hand. Keanu sighed. He always tried to be polite to fans, but he knew that one moment of recognition could turn into a series of awkward encounters. He nodded to the boy, hoping that this would be the end of it. But then a group of teenagers appeared nearby, already pulling out their phones. "Oh, shit, it's really him," one of them exclaimed. Reeves knew it was time to move on. He grabbed a bottle of water and headed deeper into the store, hoping to hide among the shelves. But luck was not on his side. In the fresh produce section, he was almost knocked down by a cart pushed with surprising dexterity by an elderly woman. "Open your eyes, young man," she said sternly, glaring at him. Keanu barely suppressed a smile. In situations like this, it was best to just apologize and move on, but before he could say anything, the old woman narrowed her eyes. "You remind me of someone. Isn't that the one who always fights in the movies?" Her voice became suspicious. "They get away with everything, these actors of yours. And in real life?" "Sorry, madam, I didn't see you," he answered calmly, hoping not to attract more attention. But the old woman was no longer listening. She turned to those around her and loudly declared, "There he is. Look at him. He thinks he can walk around here, push everyone around, and do whatever he wants." The crowd began to gather. Keanu felt a ring of people tightening around him. The screams of teenagers, the indignant old lady, the curious cashiers craning their necks to get a better look, it all turned into pure chaos. And then someone's voice pierced the noise. "Stop! Security! He stole my bag!" Everyone froze. Keanu turned around sharply and saw a man in a blue tracksuit standing at the checkout with an empty cart. His face expressed righteous indignation. "You took my bag of groceries." The man pointed an accusing finger. Keanu frowned. He didn't even understand what they were talking about. But the crowd had already begun to whisper, looking at him with suspicion. "Listen," he said calmly, "I don't even know who you are or what bag you're talking about." But the man was determined. "Yeah. You think you can do anything just because you're famous? I left my cart and you just came up and took my bag." Someone muttered. "What if it's true?" The situation was starting to get out of hand. Keanu took a step forward, but the two guards who had been just watching him moved toward him. "Sir, you're ordered to stay put," one of them said sternly. Keanu rolled his eyes. He knew that if he said the wrong thing, the situation would get worse. He took a deep breath, considering what to do. But before he could do anything, another voice called out. "It wasn't him. I saw who took the bag." Everyone turned around. The woman at the frozen food counter pointed at the guy in the gray sweater, who had quietly moved toward the exit. As soon as everyone's eyes turned to him, he suddenly jumped up and ran for the door. "Hey!" someone shouted. Reeves didn't think twice. He hadn't meant to interfere, but his instincts were faster than his thoughts. He ran after the fugitive. The guy was running for the exit, but Keanu knew he would catch up. A few moments later, he grabbed the thief by the hood, yanking it back. He screamed and fell, and the stolen bag crashed to the floor. The crowd froze. Then there were enthusiastic cries. "He got it! A real hero! He's just like in the movies." Keanu shook his head and picked up the bag. He handed it to its owner, who now looked extremely embarrassed. "I think this is yours." The man opened his mouth, but found no words. The crowd laughed. Meanwhile, the security guards grabbed the thief and took him back to the store. People applauded, someone filmed the event on their phone. Keanu just sighed. "And all this for a bottle of water," he muttered, heading for the exit. But as soon as he reached the door, someone shouted. "Hey, Reeves! Did you pay for the water?" Reeves froze. There was a moment of silence, then someone chuckled softly. He slowly turned his head and saw a young cashier in a green apron with a supermarket logo in front of him. The guy looked unsure, but he decided to voice the thought that was in the air. "Well, you ran so fast," he shrugged. "Maybe you just forgot." The crowd that had recently showered Keanu with compliments now froze in anticipation. Some were whispering, some were already holding their phones at the ready, hoping to capture the rest of the show. People always wanted a show. Reeves glanced at his hand. It still held the bottle of water he had picked up at the very beginning of this, to say the least, unusual trip to the store. He took a deep breath, suppressing a slight irritation. That's right, he just wanted to buy water, but instead he chased a thief, apprehended the criminal, and now stood in front of a crowd that was beginning to suspect him. "You're right," he said calmly, heading to the checkout. The cashier visibly relaxed. While Keanu waited for his purchase to be scanned, people gathered around him again. There was no longer the same doubt in their eyes, now it was pure admiration. "That was incredible," one of the teenagers said admiringly, filming. "How did you catch up with him so quickly? He didn't even have time to react." "Habit," Keanu answered laconically, handing the money to the cashier. "I definitely couldn't do that," someone muttered to the side. He took the bottle, but before he took a step towards the exit, he heard a familiar voice. The old woman, the same one who had recently accused him of rudeness, was now standing next to him, staring intently. There was no longer the same indignation in her gaze, but rather something like curiosity. "You're weird," she said, crossing her arms. "At first I thought you were just another actor, used to the attention. But it seems you're not like everyone else." Keanu chuckled, taking a step toward the exit. "Thanks. I guess." The old lady muttered something under her breath, but this time she didn't stop him. Instead, she nodded, as if she had come to some conclusion. As Reeves was already at the door, he was called out again. "Hey, Reeves." He turned around, expecting another strange question, but saw the same man in the blue tracksuit standing in front of him. He scratched the back of his head awkwardly, then sighed. "Listen. I'm sorry I snapped at you. I really thought it was you. Thanks for not letting him get away." Keanu just nodded, indicating that everything was fine. He had long been accustomed to people jumping to conclusions too quickly, but changing their minds just as quickly. Finally, he walked out of the supermarket. The evening air was refreshingly cool after the stuffy room. Opening the bottle, he took a few sips and headed to his car. It seemed that the story had come to an end. But no. As soon as he opened the door, the screeching of brakes came from the parking lot. Keanu turned sharply and saw a dark van, weaving between cars, racing towards the exit. The car stopped abruptly, and two masked men jumped out. One of them was holding what looked like a gun. Reeves just shook his head. Of course. Well, how could he not? The thief, who was being held by security guards at the checkout, saw the van, and his face lit up. "These are my guys," he shouted happily. The man with the gun pointed it at the guards and shouted. "Let him go if you don't want any trouble." The crowd, who had just been excitedly discussing what had happened, now scattered in panic. Some were screaming, some were hiding behind the counters. The guards froze, unsure of what to do. Keanu was about to intervene when he noticed movement off to the side. The cashier, the same young guy who had just been nervously standing next to him, was now clenching his fists tensely. He was standing just a few steps away from the fire extinguisher, clearly considering his next move. Reeves glanced at the robbers, then back at the guy. He realized that he wanted to try something, but he didn't have a chance alone. The decision came instantly. Keanu took a few steps forward and said loudly, "Hey, buddy." The man with the gun turned sharply towards him. This was the key moment. The cashier grabbed the fire extinguisher and aimed a powerful stream of foam directly at the armed criminal's face. He roared in surprise, and the second robber began to back away. Reeves did not waste time. He rushed forward, knocked the gun out of the first man's hands with one powerful movement, and then knocked him out with a sharp punch. The second robber tried to rush to the van, but before he could, the guards, finally recovering from the shock, rushed at him and knocked him to the ground. The crowd roared again, but this time with delight. "This is just crazy. I'm watching a live-action movie." Keanu straightened up and glanced at the cashier, who was now breathing heavily, still clutching the fire extinguisher. The guy looked shocked, but there was something like pride in his eyes. "Not bad," Reeves said, clapping him on the shoulder. The cashier laughed nervously. "I don't even know what to say." "Just be glad they were so slow," Keanu chuckled, heading for his car. This time he was sure, now no one would stop him. Well, at least until he wanted to buy a regular bottle of water again. Keanu Reeves got into his car and finally took a long-awaited sip of water. It was cool, but not enough to compensate for all the chaos that had happened in the last 20 minutes. He exhaled, enjoying the moment of silence until the noise in the supermarket finally died down. However, as he was about to turn the key in the ignition, his intuition sounded an alarm. He noticed movement in the rearview mirror. A man in a gray trench coat was standing next to him, pretending to fiddle with his phone, but his eyes were clearly fixed on Keanu. Experience told the actor that this was not an ordinary spectator eager for an autograph. His movements were too precise, his posture too tense. What now? Reeves thought, continuing to secretly watch the stranger. The man took a few steps forward, but immediately stopped, noticing that Keanu was watching him. Then he abruptly turned and quickly walked towards the exit of the parking lot. Reeves knew that such things do not just happen. Either this guy was up to something, or he had a good reason to hide. Forgetting about the water, he opened the door and got out of the car. The man quickened his pace, but now Keanu was moving too. No sudden movements, no unnecessary haste, but fast enough to keep him in sight. As the stranger turned the corner of the supermarket, Reeves picked up speed. He felt like he was about to find out what was going on. Around the corner was a small utility area, a blank wall, a few trash cans, and a dark alley leading to a warehouse. The man in the trench coat stood with his back to him, taking something out of his pocket. "You're either a really bad lookout, or you thought you could fool me," Keanu said calmly. The man flinched, but didn't turn around right away. He slowly put his hand back in his pocket and turned around, taking his time. Reeves could see him better now. He was thin but wiry, with short dark hair and the expression of a man accustomed to danger. "You're faster than I thought," he said with a slight grin. "But I think you know that." Keanu crossed his arms over his chest. "Can we just get down to business? Who are you and why are you following me?" The man took a deep breath, as if deciding whether to tell the truth. Finally, he stepped forward and spoke. "My name isn't important. What's important is that I know what happened in the supermarket. And I know that it was just the beginning." Reeves narrowed his eyes. He didn't like riddles, especially at times like this. "What do you mean?" The stranger looked at him carefully, then whispered. "That guy you caught. He wasn't just a thief. He was in that store for a reason. And if you think that's where it all ends, you're wrong. Keanu wasn't one for dramatic statements, but this man clearly knew something. He looked at him carefully, waiting for him to continue. They thought they could do this quietly. But you interfered. Now they'll want to get rid of you as a problem. Who are they? Keanu asked. People who can't stand it when someone ruins their plans. And that's what you just did. Reeves considered. He'd caught a small-time criminal, stopped a few robbers, but what if this was all part of something bigger? He'd seen small-time players working for bigger players before. And if this man was right, the evening was far from over. Are you here to warn me? Keanu asked. I came to offer a deal, the stranger nodded. You help me take them down, and I'll help you avoid getting caught. Keanu looked at him appraisingly. This all sounded like the beginning of a new headache, but he already knew it wouldn't go away that easily. He was used to this kind of situation, and his intuition told him that it was better to deal with it now than to find himself in the middle of an even bigger mess later. Okay, he said finally. But if you're lying to me. I'm not lying, the stranger interrupted. And trust me, you'll find out soon enough. Keanu took a deep breath, looking at him. He felt like he'd just entered a new game. And now the only thing left was to figure out how far it would take him this time. Keanu stared silently into the stranger's eyes, trying to catch a hint of truth in them. His intuition rarely failed him, but this time he felt more than a simple premonition, there was a whiff of trouble in the air. Okay, Keanu finally said, straightening up. Let's say I'm in. What now? The stranger nodded, as if he had been expecting just that answer. We need to get out of here. People are coming soon who won't like you interfering with their game. Keanu looked at him skeptically, but nodded anyway. He wasn't used to running from problems, but sometimes it was smarter to take a step back and figure out what exactly you were dealing with. He got behind the wheel, and the stranger quickly settled into the passenger seat. Where to? Keanu asked, starting the engine. I have a place where we can calmly discuss the situation, the passenger replied, looking around as if checking for surveillance. Keanu pulled out of the parking lot, driving smoothly and without any sudden maneuvers. However, in the rearview mirror, he immediately noticed two dark cars following them too persistently. Looks like your buddies are already here, Keanu noted, slightly increasing the speed. Oh, shit, the stranger muttered. We need to lose them. Keanu just chuckled. Relax. I know how to solve these issues. He abruptly turned into a side street, stepped on the gas, and then, using a sharp turn, abruptly disappeared around the corner. The cars behind him did not have time to react and braked, losing sight of them. Keanu took advantage of the moment, turned around and drove in the opposite direction, leaving his pursuers far behind. Not bad, the stranger admitted. Now we need to get to the warehouse outside the city. No one will find us there. Okay, Keanu nodded, steering the car in the right direction. But when we get there, you'll tell me everything. No secrets. Deal, the passenger sighed. The trip took about half an hour. Keanu checked several times to make sure they weren't being followed, but it seemed they had indeed managed to lose them. By the time they arrived at the warehouse, the city had completely fallen into darkness. A narrow road led them to an old, abandoned building. The headlights revealed only massive gates and peeling walls. Tastefully chosen, Keanu noted, turning off the engine. That's the whole point, the stranger replied, getting out of the car. No one will look for us here. Keanu got out and looked around. There was complete silence, only the wind rustling the trash by the gate. The stranger pulled out a set of keys, unlocked the door, and they walked inside. Now talk, Keanu said, closing the door behind him. The stranger walked over to the old table in the center of the room, dusted it off, and sat down, clasping his fingers in the lock. It all started with one big scam, he said. These people aren't just a bunch of thieves. They work for a serious organization that launders money through a network of fake supermarkets. It's just a front for the transportation of illegal goods. How do you know that? Keanu asked, narrowing his eyes. Because I used to be one of them, the man answered calmly. But I wanted out of the game. And they're not going to let me go that easily. Keanu sighed softly. Of course. Another gang, another dark scheme, and he was back in the thick of it. So now they want to take you out, he summed up. And me, too. Exactly, the man nodded. But I have information that could destroy them. That's why I was looking for you. You're the only one who can help me. Keanu thought about it. He didn't like being dragged into other people's problems, but he hated leaving them unattended even more. The only question was how deep he was willing to go. What are you suggesting? He finally asked. The stranger smiled. Let's give them hell. Keanu Reeves peered out through the glass doors of the supermarket. The night was quiet, broken only by the occasional sound of distant cars. But in his gut he knew it wasn't that simple. He had long ago learned that behind every minor incident there could be something much bigger. And today was no exception. A simple purchase of water had turned into a confrontation with criminals. Now that he knew there was something serious behind it, he couldn't just walk away. We need to move, said the voice of a stranger, a former gang member, who was now sitting across from him in an abandoned house on the outskirts of Los Angeles. They won't let this go. You're in trouble, buddy. Keanu didn't need reminding. He knew that after catching the thief in the supermarket, there could now be someone much more powerful behind him. But he also knew that the best way to survive was to act first. They have a control center, he asked. The stranger nodded. This area is controlled by one gang. The whole block is their territory. All the records of transactions and the people they use are stored there. If you want to hit them, you have a chance. Keanu smirked. What makes you think I want that? Because you're not the type to leave things unfinished, the man replied with a shrug. And if you don't, they'll come after you. The decision was made. 20 minutes later, Keanu was in his car, heading to the most dangerous area of the city. He was thinking about the plan: enter undetected, get to the computers, take the data, leave. Simple in theory. Complicated in practice. When he pulled up to his target, everything was too quiet. Too quiet. The area looked empty, but he knew it was just a disguise. He parked his car in the shadows of an abandoned warehouse and headed for the side entrance of an old building. The high fence was no problem for him. He grabbed the edge in one leap, pulled himself up, and dropped softly to the other side. The darkness was filled with rare flashes of light from the windows. He quickly found the blind spot of the cameras and moved on. He heard voices ahead. Keanu froze, listening. The men were discussing a shipment of goods, confirmation that there really was a big game going on here. He slipped inside through a side door and moved down a dark corridor. A creak. Someone's footsteps. Keanu ducked behind the nearest column, holding his breath. A security guard walked past, his face buried in his phone. There was no point in wasting time on him. The goal was information, not a fight. Finally, he found the right room. Picking the lock was easy. Inside, monitor screens flickered in the semi-darkness. He sat down at the keyboard, inserted the flash drive, and began copying files. Come on, come on. He muttered, watching the loading indicator. But a second later, footsteps were heard outside the door. Several people. Keanu managed to pull out the flash drive a moment before the door swung open. Who are you? One of the men barked, grabbing his weapon. Keanu didn't wait. In one movement, he knocked the closest opponent off his feet, knocking the gun away. A shot rang out, the bullet went into the ceiling. He hit the second one in the jaw with his elbow, and slammed the third one's face into the wall. But time was lost. An alarm siren wailed over the area. Keanu grabbed the flash drive and rushed to the exit. He heard screams and the stamping of feet behind him. He ran out into the yard, and stopped. They were already waiting for him. Several armed men stood in a semicircle, aiming straight at him. "Game over, buddy," one of them smirked. "Did you really think you could just walk in and out?" Keanu smiled slightly in response. "No. I thought I could put on a show." He darted to the side, kicking up a handful of dust and throwing it into the face of the nearest enemy. At the same time, he lunged forward, knocking the weapon out of one of the enemies and throwing it aside. A series of quick strikes, one after another, the enemies fell. But there were too many of them. He dodged, avoiding a bullet. He darted to the wall, jumped over a dumpster. There had to be an exit ahead. But suddenly, an engine roared. A black SUV was flying straight at him. Keanu barely managed to jump out of the way, rolling along the ground. The car sped past, but was already turning for a second pass. He took off, heading for the truck parked at the exit of the block. He had one chance left. He pulled a small remote out of his pocket and pressed the button. The street shook with an explosion. The pre-planted explosives worked perfectly, turning the building behind him into a blazing mess. While his pursuers tried to comprehend what had happened, Keanu jumped into the truck, started it, and tore away. He pressed the gas pedal, feeling his heart pounding in his chest. In his hands was the flash drive with the evidence. But the game was not over yet. Keanu Reeves sped through the night in Los Angeles, clutching a flash drive with stolen data in his hands. His heart was beating steadily, his breathing was calm. He had been in situations like this before. But he knew that this was only the beginning. Headlights flashed in the rearview mirror. The chase was ongoing. Those he had crossed were not going to let him go so easily. A black SUV was racing after him, packed to the brim with armed thugs, ready to open fire at the first opportunity. "Well, guys, let's see what you can do," Keanu thought, pressing on the gas. He abruptly turned into a narrow alley, the wheels screeched, the car swerved, but he maintained control. The SUV did not have time to repeat the maneuver and crashed into the dumpsters with a roar. A couple of seconds of head start, but he was not fooling himself. This is not the end. His target was a journalist, a man who could expose this data. The flash drive contained financial transactions, connections, evidence of crimes that could destroy the entire criminal network. But getting to him was not that easy. Keanu knew that they were already waiting for him. Ahead of him, a building appeared, an old independent newspaper office, not yet taken over by the corporations. He parked his car in the shadows and walked out, looking around carefully. Only a few lights were on in the office. Inside, Miles was waiting for him, the only journalist he could trust. Climbing the stairs, he knocked. A few seconds later, the door opened, and a man in glasses appeared on the threshold, his eyes tired but alert. "Damn it, Keanu, you have no idea what kind of trouble you got me into this time," Miles muttered, letting him in. "Good to see you, Miles," Reeves grinned, closing the door behind him. "I have something interesting." He held out the flash drive. The journalist glanced at it, then at Keanu and sighed heavily. "Let me guess. This is the thing that half the city is after you for." "Exactly. There's enough data in here to destroy the entire organization. The question is, can you use it before they get to us?" Miles quickly inserted the flash drive into his laptop and began to look through the files. His eyes widened. "Damn, this is serious," he muttered. "If this gets out, not only the gang, but several corrupt officials will end up behind bars." At that moment, the sound of cars approaching was heard outside the window. Keanu immediately stepped to the curtain and looked out. Several cars stopped outside the building. Armed men got out of them. "We have guests," he said calmly, taking out his gun. Do you have a better plan than just dying for the truth? Miles swallowed nervously and grabbed the phone. I can send the data to the editor and a few trusted people. Even if we're gone, the information will still get out. Then hurry up, Keanu checked the clip. I'll buy you time. There was a crash of a door being knocked down. The first fighters rushed inside. They moved quickly, in a coordinated manner, professionals. But Keanu was ready. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. He struck with lightning speed, knocking the first enemy down. He met the second with a short, powerful elbow to the face. The others opened fire. Keanu slid behind the wall, then fired quickly. 2 accurate hits, and 2 opponents collapsed to the floor. The others began to surround him, but he moved faster than they could have predicted. Keanu, get the flash drive. Miles shouted, holding out the device. It's loaded. We need to get out of here. Follow me. Reeves commanded, making his way to the exit. Bullets whistled through the air, but he didn't stop. He kicked down the back door and pushed the journalist out. At that moment, an explosion sounded behind them, someone threw a grenade inside. Fire and smoke filled the building, but Keanu had already led Miles out onto the street. Their car was parked a few meters away. Start it. The journalist shouted, jumping behind the wheel. Reeves jumped into the passenger seat, and the car took off, carrying them away from the burning building. But it wasn't over yet. Now that the truth was out, all that was left was to wait and see who would fall first in this game. And Keanu knew his job wasn't done yet. The city was buzzing with headlines. All the information from the flash drive had spread across the internet, covering the Los Angeles criminal underworld like a tsunami. Corrupt officials, gang leaders, shadow players, they were all now in the crosshairs. But Keanu Reeves knew it wasn't over. It wasn't just gangsters who were after him now, but also those who were used to operating from the shadows. He sat in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, watching the news. The phone rang. It was Miles. Keanu, we did it. But they're still coming for us. I know. Where are you? The newsroom. They're already tracking me, but I've sent copies of the data to independent sources. If something happens to me, the process won't stop. Stay there. I'll handle it. Keanu stepped outside. The air was heavy, tense. He knew they were waiting for him. He was ready. 20 minutes later, he stood in front of the editorial office. The windows were lit, but there was something ominous in the atmosphere. He stepped inside, sensing that an ambush was imminent. The first blow came from the right. He dodged, sticking out his elbow. The attacker fell before he could even process what had happened. The second one lunged with a knife, but Keanu intercepted his hand and instantly sent the enemy to the floor. A shot rang out. He abruptly dodged to the side, the bullet flew past. Keanu took out his pistol, fired one precise shot, and the enemy was no longer a threat. Reeves, a voice rang out. A man in an expensive suit stood at the end of the corridor. Michael. The man who ordered all this. Did you really think you could change the course of the game? He smirked. I don't think. I act, Keanu replied. A short pause. Then Michael jerked his hand to his holster, but Keanu was faster. One shot, and the man who had kept half the city in fear fell to the floor. Miles ran out of the office. Is this the end? Keanu nodded. 5 minutes later, the police arrived. The main suspect was dead, the information was out, and the whole system was cracking. He stepped outside, feeling the tension finally subside. This chapter was over. He had done what he had to. Now there was only one thing left to do, disappear. The car was already waiting. Keanu got behind the wheel, glanced in the rearview mirror and grinned. The city lived its own life. But now, without him. He stepped on the gas and disappeared into the night.